Europe is a continent celebrated for its rich history, vibrant culture, and powerful economies. But beyond the cobblestone streets and postcard skylines lies a deeper, often hidden truth, a growing divide between prosperity and poverty. Over 95 million people across the European Union now live below the poverty line, surviving on less than 60% of the median income in their countries. Even more heartbreaking, nearly 20 million children, that's 1 in 4, are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. While some nations surge ahead with tech, trade, and tourism, others are being left behind, trapped in cycles of unemployment, corruption, and population decline. Entire communities are fading, and the promise of Europe feels more distant than ever. In this video, we uncover the 10 poorest countries in Europe in 2025, exploring the economic hardships they face and the uphill battles their citizens fight every day. These are the stories the travel brochures won't show you, but they deserve to be seen. Number 10. Ukraine. Despite its rich agricultural resources, they remains one of the poorest nations in Europe with a GDP per capita of $3,425 in 2024. Ukraine's economy is heavily dependent on agriculture, particularly wheat and corn, but this leaves the country vulnerable to climate conditions and global market fluctuations. The ongoing war with Russia has only deepened Ukraine's economic crisis, resulting in widespread destruction, displacement of millions, and a drastic reduction in industrial output. The country faces numerous challenges, including corruption, political instability, and lack of economic diversification. Despite the challenges, Ukraine is striving for economic reform and has received substantial foreign aid from international organizations, hoping to rebuild its infrastructure and economy. Yet, as of now, the destruction of key economic hubs, such as factories and energy plants, continues to stunt recovery. Agriculture remains the lifeline of Ukraine's economy, but without political stability and significant reforms, its potential remains limited. The war has forced millions of Ukrainians to flee the country, further hurting the labor force and decreasing domestic productivity. For many, poverty remains a harsh reality, and the future of Ukraine's economic growth is uncertain. The country continues to look towards Europe for support, focusing on strengthening its ties with the European Union. However, the lack of infrastructure, political cohesion, and ongoing conflict means that it may take years for Ukraine to recover fully, and poverty will likely remain entrenched for the foreseeable future. Number 9. Moldova. With a GDP per capita of just $4,600 in 2024, making it one of the poorest nations in Europe. With a population of only 2.6 million, Moldova faces chronic economic challenges, including a heavy dependence on agriculture and remittances from Moldovans working abroad. The country's economy is undermined by corruption, a weak rule of law, and inadequate infrastructure, making it difficult to attract foreign investment. Moldova also faces a severe energy crisis, with the country relying on energy imports, primarily from Russia, and unable to diversify its energy sources. High public debt and slow economic reforms have kept Moldova stuck in poverty, and efforts to modernize the economy have met with limited success. This lack of economic progress has left many Moldovans seeking better opportunities abroad, further draining the country of its skilled workforce. While Moldova's agricultural sector continues to make up a significant portion of its economy, it remains vulnerable to external shocks, such as changes in commodity prices. The country's reliance on external aid and remittances from its diaspora has propped up the economy, but at the cost of fostering self-sufficiency. Many Moldovans continue to live below the poverty line, with rural areas particularly suffering from poor infrastructure and lack of job opportunities. Despite its struggles, Moldova has made efforts to integrate with the European Union, but its progress has been slow, hindered by political instability and entrenched corruption. Economic recovery seems unlikely without substantial reforms and support from the European Union, but as of now, Moldova remains among the poorest in Europe. Number 8. Albania, a country with a GDP per capita of $5,200 in 2024. Albania has made progress in recent years, particularly in tourism, which has become a growing sector in its economy. However, the country's overall economic growth has been hindered by high unemployment rates, especially in rural areas, and a large informal economy that limits tax collection and public service funding. The government's focus on infrastructure development and attracting foreign investment has had some success, but corruption and political instability continue to deter long-term investments. Albania is still heavily reliant on remittances from its diaspora, which helps keep many families afloat, but it has not yet developed the diversified economy necessary for sustained growth. Albania's agricultural sector plays a vital role, with the country producing a range of products, but the sector remains underdeveloped, and rural areas suffer from inadequate infrastructure. While Albania has made strides in improving its tourism offerings, its economic potential is still limited by its small industrial base and slow-moving structural reforms. Despite these obstacles, Albania has worked hard to improve its international standing, with the goal of joining the European Union. However, the slow pace of reforms, particularly in governance and rule of law, continues to hold the country back, leaving many Albanians struggling with poverty. Number 7. North Macedonia, with a GDP per capita of $5,700 in 2024. The country has a population of just 2.1 million and continues to face economic challenges, including high unemployment rates, especially among youth. North Macedonia's economy is heavily dependent on manufacturing, mining, and agriculture, which are vulnerable to global price fluctuations. While there have been efforts to modernize the economy, the country still struggles with political instability and corruption. The government's push to attract foreign investment has had some success, particularly in the automotive sector, but economic growth remains sluggish. Political fragmentation and ethnic tensions further complicate economic progress, as they create uncertainty for investors and impede the development of consistent, long-term economic policies. Additionally, while the tourism sector is growing, it's not enough to counterbalance the slow pace of industrial growth. North Macedonia faces the challenge of improving its infrastructure and diversifying its economy. The country's efforts to integrate with the European Union are still in the early stages, and reforms are slow. The ongoing political instability and deep-rooted ethnic divisions continue to hamper the nation's ability to foster a cohesive and stable economy. Despite these challenges, the country remains focused on European Union membership, and there have been signs of progress in areas like energy and infrastructure development. However, for most Macedonians, poverty remains a widespread issue, with unemployment and underemployment being major concerns. Number 6. Bosnia and Herzegovina, with a GDP per capita of $6,100 in 2024, comes in at number 6. The country's economy continues to suffer from political fragmentation, a legacy of the Bosnian War in the 1990s. With a population of 3.3 million, Bosnia remains deeply divided along ethnic lines, which makes it difficult for the government to implement effective and cohesive economic policies. The lack of political unity and corruption are major roadblocks to economic progress. The country faces a high unemployment rate, particularly among youth, and many citizens continue to live in poverty. Bosnia's economy is overly reliant on the public sector, and while the agricultural and manufacturing sectors provide some employment, they are underdeveloped compared to other European nations. The slow pace of reforms and a weak judicial system continue to deter foreign investment. Bosnia's economic struggles are further exacerbated by its dependence on remittances and foreign aid, which support a large portion of the population. While tourism is slowly growing, especially in the cities of Sarajevo and Mostar, it hasn't been enough to drive significant economic growth. The country's reliance on external financial support limits its ability to build self-sufficiency and reduce poverty. Bosnia and Herzegovina is working toward European Union integration, but political instability, ethnic tensions, and entrenched corruption have slowed progress. Until these issues are addressed, the country's path to prosperity will remain uncertain. Number 5. Belarus, with a GDP per capita of $6,300 in 2024. With a population of 9.4 million, Belarus has faced significant economic challenges under its authoritarian government. The government's tight control over the economy has stifled private enterprise, and the country remains heavily dependent on state-owned enterprises. Political repression and economic sanctions imposed by Western countries have further isolated Belarus from the global economy, exacerbating its struggles. Despite having a relatively well-developed industrial base, Belarus's economy is highly vulnerable to external shocks, particularly in the energy sector. The country's reliance on Russia for energy supplies has left it exposed to fluctuating global energy prices. The economy is stagnating, and inflation rates remain high, pushing many citizens into poverty. Belarus has tried to diversify its economy, but progress has been slow. Many young Belarusians have migrated abroad in search of better opportunities, further draining the country's skilled workforce. The lack of foreign investment, coupled with an aging population, means that the country's economic prospects are dim. The political climate in Belarus remains oppressive, with limited opportunities for reforms and little to no public dissent allowed. Until the government embraces meaningful reforms and loosens its control over the economy, Belarus will continue to struggle with poverty and economic stagnation. Number 4. Serbia, with a GDP per capita of $7,400 in 2024, ranks fourth among Europe's poorest nations. While the country has made strides in stabilizing its economy, the scars of its turbulent past are still visible. Having suffered from the breakup of Yugoslavia and the subsequent wars, Serbia faces economic stagnation, with a slow recovery hampered by political instability and corruption. High unemployment rates persist, especially among young people, leaving many without prospects for a brighter future. Serbia's economy is largely dependent on agriculture, mining, and manufacturing, but these sectors are underdeveloped compared to other European countries. Although Serbia has been successful in attracting some foreign investment, particularly in the automotive industry, its economic potential is hindered by weak institutions, poor governance, and insufficient infrastructure. The country remains highly reliant on remittances from its diaspora, which serve as a crucial source of income for many families. In addition to high unemployment, Serbia struggles with inflation and a fragile banking system, which further limits economic growth. Poverty is widespread, particularly in rural areas, where infrastructure is poor, and job opportunities are scarce. While Serbia has improved its business environment, it still lags behind its European Union neighbors in terms of industrial output and living standards. Serbia is working to strengthen ties with the European Union and modernize its economy, but progress has been slow. The country's efforts to reform its political system and attract investment have been undermined by corruption and entrenched political divisions. Until these issues are resolved, Serbia will continue to struggle with poverty and economic inequality. Number 3. Kosovo, with a GDP per capita of just $7,900 in 2024. Despite gaining independence from Serbia in 2008, Kosovo remains one of Europe's poorest nations, with a high unemployment rate, especially among youth. The country's economy is heavily reliant on remittances from its diaspora, and while there has been some progress in infrastructure development, the overall economic situation remains precarious. Kosovo's political instability and ethnic tensions contribute to an environment of uncertainty for investors, limiting long-term economic growth. The agricultural sector plays a significant role in Kosovo's economy, but it remains underdeveloped, with outdated farming practices and a lack of modern technology. Industry, which could help diversify the economy, is also poorly developed, and the service sector is not large enough to drive significant growth. Kosovo faces a lack of job opportunities, with many citizens migrating abroad in search of better prospects. Kosovo has implemented some reforms aimed at attracting foreign investment and improving governance, but corruption remains a significant issue. The economy is also heavily reliant on international aid and financial support from the European Union and other donors, which has helped stabilize the country but is not a sustainable long-term solution. Poverty remains widespread, particularly in rural areas, and the country struggles to provide basic services to its citizens. Despite its challenges, Kosovo has made efforts to integrate into the global economy, seeking recognition from more countries and working toward European Union membership. However, Kosovo's unresolved political status and limited economic diversification continue to prevent it from fully tapping into its economic potential. Number 2. Moldova, with a GDP per capita of just $4,600 in 2024. This small, landlocked country faces persistent economic difficulties, exacerbated by its reliance on agriculture, which is vulnerable to climate change and market fluctuations. While Moldova has made some progress in terms of economic reforms, it remains one of the poorest countries in Europe due to political instability, corruption, and its weak economic structure. The country also faces high levels of migration, with many Moldovans seeking better opportunities abroad, further draining the economy of its skilled workforce. Moldova's agricultural sector continues to be its primary economic driver, but the country's lack of infrastructure and technology limits its productivity. The country's heavy reliance on remittances from Moldovans living abroad means that its economy is highly dependent on external factors, such as the state of global markets and the willingness of the diaspora to send money back home. While Moldova is slowly diversifying its economy with some success in sectors like IT and tourism, progress has been slow. The political situation in Moldova remains fragile, with deep divisions between pro-European and pro-Russian factions. This political instability has hindered the implementation of essential reforms and discouraged foreign investment. Corruption remains endemic in both the public and private sectors, further exacerbating poverty and unemployment. Moldova continues to seek closer ties with the European Union, but its path to integration is obstructed by internal political divisions, poor governance, and the unresolved issue of its breakaway region of Transnistria. While there are signs of progress, Moldova remains highly dependent on foreign aid and has a long road ahead before it can overcome its economic challenges. Number 1. Georgia. With a GDP per capita of approximately $4,200 in 2024, faces significant economic challenges despite its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Georgia has made strides in economic reform, transitioning towards a more market-oriented economy, but struggles with high unemployment rates, particularly in rural areas, and a lack of industrial diversification. The country's economy relies heavily on agriculture, tourism, and remittances, which leaves it vulnerable to external shocks, such as global market fluctuations and climate change. Georgia's political instability, lingering tensions with Russia, and the unresolved status of its breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia further complicate its economic prospects. The government has made efforts to attract foreign investment and strengthen ties with the European Union, but progress is slow, hampered by weak institutions and corruption. Poverty remains widespread, particularly in rural areas, where access to education, healthcare, and job opportunities is limited. Despite these challenges, Georgia is taking steps to improve its economic outlook through reforms in governance and infrastructure development. However, the road to sustained growth and poverty alleviation remains long and uncertain. The economic challenges faced by the poorest countries in Europe are vast and deeply interlinked with historical, political, and social issues. Countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Serbia are grappling with high unemployment, corruption, political instability, and a reliance on agriculture, which often keeps them vulnerable to external shocks. Despite their struggles, these nations are striving to improve their economic standing through reforms, international support, and modernization efforts. However, overcoming these obstacles will require sustained commitment to governance, economic diversification, and infrastructure development. The journey towards prosperity is long, but the resilience of these countries gives hope for future progress.